So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is AWS On Air Startup, and we come to you every single Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. UTC, 4 a.m. Australia time. That's taken me a long time to be able to get all of that mouthful right. But we're here every Tuesday to really provide you with advice on how to build your startup in AWS. Keep the comments flowing in. Hello, everyone. Let us know where you're coming in from. And let's do some intros before we start with an icebreaker, just as a way to warm up your fingers to the keyboard, because we do this live because we want to be able to hear from you. We want to we want you to ask questions and for you to get those answers to any of those questions related to starting up your startup in AWS, and specific to the topic that we've got going on today. So let's do some intros. My name is Jillian Ford, and I'm a startup solutions architect. And I've got the amazing, the genius, the one and only Andrew Hopper on the startups team.
Thanks, Jillian. I don't know. That's a lot to live up to. I'll do my best today.
You really are. And I love how we've got so many people from all over the world flooding the comments. We've got Turkey. We've got Victor in Seattle, Saudi Arabia, London. Anyone in Boston, Massachusetts? Andrew's in where? Are you in Boston or outside?
I'm outside Boston at the moment.
Okay. Yeah. I'm in Boston. We've got New York, Germany, South Africa, Razvan, Romania, Nigeria, Turkey, London. Wow, I love it. I love all those comments that are flowing in. And so we've got today's icebreaker as a way of just for you to get used to putting in something in the chat, because that's what this is all about, is answering your questions. So today's icebreaker question is, tell us your favorite kids TV show. And this was inspired because Andrew is a father. So I figured there's probably some TV show that you're probably watching a lot right now with kids, or maybe you have a childhood TV show that you really liked.
That's a good one. I'm curious to see in the chat too if folks get to participate in the icebreaker there. So I'm a big fan of Bluey, which is this adorable little dingo from Australia, and especially there's an episode, Daddy Robo, and the dad is just basically controlled by the little children and marches around, and I love playing around with my kids, so really enjoy that.
That sounds so cute.
Bluey and Daddy Dingo.
Oh my God, we've got XMen. Yes, Eric, XMen. Thank you, Eric, for putting XMen in. Bugs Bunny. Oh, Paul, thank you. Yep. Casper the Friendly Ghost. Oh my God, Kimberly, thank you. Roadrunner. Bluey, is that what you said? Bluey, or does it sound similar? Bluey. Oh, all right. There we go. We've got some other Reading Rainbow. Oh my God, these are my people here. They know all these shows I watched. Family Guy. I love it. Tom and Jerry. I mean, we're going old school with these shows. I don't know if any of these are. We've got so many. Peppa Pig. I don't know if that's a show, but it sounds kind of fun. Okay, I love it. Mine, I would say, is what came to mind was Power Rangers. I have no idea why that came to mind, but I just definitely love that. Yes, as a kid, I think that was like what I wanted to be before I knew about the SA role, was a Power Ranger, and then I realized that wasn't gonna really pan out. No one was hiring for a Power Ranger, so I decided to help startups build their business on AWS. And today's topic is all about how to migrate your startup wherever it is that you're hosting now into AWS. I get it that there's probably a lot of you maybe who have built a business, you have a lot of technical skills, but the process of migrating a business to AWS takes different thought process, maybe different skills that maybe you just aren't used to. And so that's where we want to share some of our best practices, where we've helped collectively hundreds of startups now be able to migrate to AWS as safely as possible. And so we want to go through that today and make sure any questions that you have as we're going through this topic, put them in the chat. And I love that there's more people telling us their TV shows. Jetsons, Winnie the Pooh. This is amazing. Love this, the crowd. All right. So the first step, I guess, we're really wanting to get into is before you even really start, you've got to be able to, there's first setting up your AWS account just to have that secure environment before you even assess. Or do you, Andrew, in your opinion, when someone says, all right, I want to migrate, do you first assess what's in their AWS account, or do you tell them to first set up like a secure environment of where it is that they're going to be hosting this application in AWS?
Yeah, there are a lot of dimensions to think about when you're
Yeah.
migrating, whether you're migrating from say a legacy application. Maybe you started out on Linode or Rackspace or Bluehost or something like that. Maybe you're coming from your computer. But I really am AWS or Amazon collectively is a fan of this concept of working backwards. So think working
Good call.
backwards from be customer obsessed, working backwards from your end goal. What is it that you're really trying to achieve? Why are you migrating? Is it the right time to migrate too? Sometimes, if you're just about to do a pitch to an investor, for example, maybe you want to wait a little bit for your migration. So first and foremost, I'd say take a step back and take stock of what it is you're trying to accomplish for your business, because ultimately we build technology to do things for people, to help them have better lives, happier, healthier lives, help them be more productive. So that's always the North Star that I try and focus on. So then taking a step back, I guess there are a bunch of different dimensions to that. So there's a question of what's being migrated. How do we determine what success looks like here? Is it no downtime? Is it alleviating some performance issues? Is it just getting it to a place where people can access it? Then the next step would be to determine your migration strategy. And there are a bunch of different ways to think about migrating. Do you just redeploy it on AWS? Do you make some changes to try and improve the scalability, performance, or cost effectiveness? And then ultimately you would execute your migration and do your cutover. So lots of different things to think about. But as Jillian mentioned, security is really an important thing to think about as you are planning your migration, because it's a great time to, for example, if you had not encrypted your database because you were just trying to get going quickly, when you migrate, it's very easy to just say, okay, I'm going to take a minute now to encrypt my database, or I have some old developers some outsourced developers that we were using, and they have access to all the usernames and passwords because we shared everything. So let's take a minute to sort of reevaluate how we think about credential management in this new environment. So that's just a backdrop. We'll dive into each of those in more detail.
I love it. Yeah. And there's a question that came in that probably applies to a lot of people here. So there's probably a lot of startups that you've spoken to. Maybe they start someplace else because they don't have experience in AWS. And then there comes a time where they decide that AWS makes sense for their business, but they haven't used AWS before. So with that persona in mind, what's some advice that you would tell that person of how to get started with AWS?
Yeah, so I want to learn AWS deeply, but I don't know where to start. Can you provide us the main features of AWS and documentation? So everyone has different learning styles. Some people like books, some people like to dive in and be really hands-on. My journey in technology started when back in the 90s, I said, I wonder how Yahoo works. I wonder if I can build something like Yahoo. And then it sent me down this sort of journey, or kicked off this journey, where I started to learn about how to represent hierarchies in databases, et cetera. And at that point, I would actually go to my local bookstore and buy a book, probably Visual Basic in 21 days, or teach yourself Java fundamentals. And that was the way that I learned. Nowadays, there are amazing resources to help you learn. So if you want to learn, there are two things I would say. One is, if you want to become an AWS expert, the AWS certification exams are a really great resource for that. They will help you learn AWS inside and out. They are extremely thorough. Specifically, you could start with an AWS Solutions Architect Associate certification. And then once you have that, proceed to a solutions architect professional certificate. And there are a lot of really great classes, online courses to help you prepare for those. Things like A Cloud Guru is a popular one, Tutorials Dojo, Cloud Academy, Wiz Labs. So those are really, really fantastic. So if you're the type of person who wants to take a course, go to school, and like to learn that way, that's a great way to go. But you can also, there's a free tier. So you can go on and you can say, I want to build an Uber clone, or I want to build a Facebook clone. How do I do that? And just start to hack away and pop into some discords and just start to learn, look at GitHub for some starter apps and starter repos. So there are about as many ways to approach this as there are colors in the rainbow. But I would say I'm a big fan of just getting your hands dirty, and you'll find some things resonate. Some things just aren't necessarily an area you're super interested in. I love analytics. I'm not so interested in observability, for example. I do it because I need to do it, but it's not something that I'm passionate about. So I imagine you'll find an area that you're really excited about.
Yeah, I love great example. So yeah, let's go back to, and that was a great question. Thanks for asking that, the person on LinkedIn. Um, so yeah, let's go into maybe some of the things that you would help kind of think through a migration. It could be setting up your account. And I know you've got this handy whiteboard that I like that you like to use to help people to diagram for customers.
Yeah, so if I think about a migration, there are a couple of different questions you'd ask. So working backwards from the end, what is your goal, or what's the end that you're going to be trying to achieve? Then along the way, you have these questions. What's your current state? So your current state, and then in between you have this question of what's the right journey. So like any journey, if you were going to walk across a mountain range, you have certain things at your disposal. You have skills, right? You have a certain amount of time. You have a certain amount of supplies, right? So you have food, etc. And in the same way, as you think about a migration, there might be certain skills you have. Like, do you know Terraform really well? Are you a ninja with Bash scripts? Are you a chef or Ansible expert? So you'd want to think about the skills that you have. Then time too. Are you trying to migrate within the next couple of days because you have some production outage? Are you trying to migrate immediately? And then supplies, or I guess resources, is probably a better way to think about this. So how much are you willing to invest in this in terms of your team, or if you're working with multiple people? So how much do you want to improve or pay off tech debt as you're migrating? So there's different dimensions. It's where am I trying to go? How much time do I have to get there? What skills do I have available to me? What resources do I have in terms of time or people that I can commit to the project? So once you take stock of where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do, then I'd recommend a multi-phased approach. So this is a little bit of sort of corporate ease, if you will. That's probably a holdover from my days when I would run large consulting projects, but it stands up here. You essentially would do a discovery. So what are you trying to migrate? Are you trying to migrate an app? Are you trying to migrate a database? Do you have an add-on? Is in a platform like Heroku, you have add-ons like Workers or a cache or something like that. So what are you trying to migrate? Then you need to make, so that's what are you trying to migrate? Then what's your plan? Can you migrate this? Is it okay to have some downtime, or do you need to have no downtime? Can you schedule a maintenance window late at night, in the middle of the night, and just dump your database and then reload it? Or do you need to configure replication? So you want to think about, can you tolerate downtime? what are some of the risks that you might encounter with a migration. So let's say you have a question about an SSL certificates or misconfigured DNS records. So you want to think ahead of time, what could go wrong and how might I plan to address that. So lastly, you want to also think about costs. So oftentimes AWS can be less expensive than a place that if you're migrating from a managed platform, you might find that AWS is less expensive. If you're deploying an app for the first time, it might be appropriate to understand, to project what the cost might be. So we have a pricing calculator where you can go in and get a sense of what the cost is. So you're going to figure out what are the risks, what's my plan, and then you're going to need to figure out, additionally, as part of this plan, what are the we'll call the destinations for these workloads. So are you going to use, let's say you have MySQL running on your a Linode server, for example. Are you going to run MySQL on your own on your AWS infrastructure? Or is there a different way you might approach that? For example, we have Relational Database Service, RDS, which is a managed database service. The advantage of a managed database service is that patching is handled for you, the security of the OS is handled for you, backups are handled for you. It's much easier to create read replicas and whatnot. So there are many. You have access to the 24/7 support team to troubleshoot issues. So a lot of customers find that it makes sense to offload the undifferentiated heavy lifting of managing a database engine to the pros at AWS who do that all day, every day.
Yeah, Andrew, I'm going to just pause for 1 second. There was a few clarifying questions. So there was someone asked, can we ask a question? And absolutely, that is why we do this live instead of just a recording that as a webinar. So please ask your questions throughout this topic. We're really focusing the questions really on migrating a startup from wherever it is into AWS. That's really what the focus is for today's topic. There was also another question about, is this going to be will you be able to watch this afterwards? And the answer is yes. So every single recording that we do with AWS On Air, it goes onto YouTube. You'll find it on the AWS Events YouTube channel. So you definitely want to check that out. Maybe by Friday or next week, you'll be able to see this actual recording, which I know a lot of these, there's so much information. It can be really like you can sit through it and be like, oh my God, wait, this is a little bit overwhelming. I want to see this process that Andrew's walking through me. It's another round of a time. So I definitely recommend after this, you can sit down and go through it again as you are planning out your own migration.
Yeah, keep the questions coming. This is great.
Yeah.
There was one, how does AWS stand out versus other companies that someone might choose? And one of the things that I love about AWS is the customer focus. So over 90% of our roadmap is driven by direct feedback from customers. Often we will not raise prices, but in fact decrease prices. So I've just found that the most breadth and depth of services. So if you need it, it's in AWS. And it's just, there's a real endless focus on customer obsession. So let's see. So in terms of your migration, you first think about, what am I migrating? What are my business constraints? What are the reasons why I'm migrating? Am I migrating because I have downtime, because it's expensive, because I can't get SOC 2 or HIPAA where I am, or I just want to put my app somewhere where other people can see it?
Oh,
So,
we've got an interesting question that's related to this.
yeah.
So is it possible to migrate any type of app? And maybe we should define what are the kinds of maybe common apps, because I guess we could probably spend the next hour just on this question.
Sure.
But what are some of maybe the common apps that you see migrated?
Yeah, you'll have to keep me from going down the rabbit hole. So,
Maybe, yeah, like top three. Let's maybe we'll keep it that simple.
Yeah, so so most common apps that are a target for migration would be probably a three-tier web app. So think about
Mm-hmm.
PHP or Laravel, Python, Ruby, Django, something like that with a database server. So you're talking about, you have your database plus maybe a couple app servers, um, and then a load balancer. So I'd say that's your traditional end tier web app. So then the other things that we see migrated are, we'll call them Jamstack. So JavaScript apps where you might have something like React or a Next.js application view, something like that. And then there would be an API here. Folks sometimes use Node or Flask or Fast CGI, and then a database here. Then additionally, we have mobile frameworks. So with AWS Amplify, we have the ability to rapidly create and deploy mobile apps. So we have an AWS essentially backend for mobile apps. So those are the most common, just for fun, things that you couldn't migrate to AWS. Things like an air-gapped government app, maybe. Although we do host workloads for the CIA and NSA, so even those workloads run. But there are very subtle nuances, like if you need a virtual IP address for a high availability telephony solution, you can't just migrate it directly over. Or if you need certain UDP multicast in certain scenarios, there are certain differences in the way that it works on the cloud versus on-prem. So generally, the answer is yes, you can
Yeah,
migrate almost everything.
so true. Yeah, I mean, lately I've seen a lot of, maybe there's people here who are doing machine learning. They started machine learning training maybe just on their laptop or someplace else, and they realize that they want to be able to use AWS because they're at a point where they want to be able to scale their inference jobs, their machine learning training pipeline. That's one that I see commonly. Maybe some other, if you're life sciences, you've started doing some maybe genomics type of processing on your laptop, and you're like, all right, I actually need some more CPUs than this. So that's a common one that we see. Um, oh, here's another one I want to make sure we get through these questions. So how difficult is it to migrate a microservices based backend to AWS? And I know everything always it depends. Um, but maybe if there's anything kind of specific that maybe we can go into that to answer this question of how we can help make that more of a smoother process, because there's a lot of different tools that AWS provides.
Yeah, so it's as a solution architect, we always say it depends.
Yeah.
So that could be microservices defined as a Go operator or a Helm chart in Kubernetes, and in that case, it's easy as pie. You just deploy a Kubernetes cluster in AWS using the EKS Elastic Kubernetes service. You deploy your Helm chart, and you're good to go. In other cases, you might have a constellation of microservices using different data stores or using different infrastructure as code tools. So we have many customers running thousands of microservices workloads, if not millions. So it's certainly possible. I would say it depends. It depends a little bit on your particular scenario. If you have specific questions, we have AWS account teams that
Hmm.
are
Yeah.
available, so we can schedule one-off calls to dive into that. If you are in a spot where you don't have access to an AWS account team, we have some great resources like Repost
Yeah.
AWS, which is a bit like Stack Overflow, and you can ask questions there, and folks from our solutions architecture and support teams monitor that, and we'll do their best to get back to you to respond to your question.
Yeah. And then, of course, events like this where uh, experts in AWS, we do these lives and we do ask questions, and all different teams will do these types of events. I have videos on YouTube that explain how to actually migrate, different processes of a migration. So there's a lot of resources that are out there that are freely available that can really guide you throughout the whole process. And of course, when you're able to ask those questions on Repost, maybe AWS IQ to hire someone else as an example, those resources are there for you as well. There was one other question that is also kind of related to where we were a bit going as well. and it's serverless. So do you consider a migration to a serverless architecture with Lambda functions and SAM, or it's more common to migrate to ECS or EKS? And maybe the because of course that's another it depends answer. It's all really based on your application now, and kind of what, going back to what you were talking about of what is really the goals that you're looking for. Are you looking to decouple it into serverless microservices, or just do a lift and ship from maybe containers to containers, for example? But maybe we can kind of look into, Andrew, for this question, like, do you see customers migrating? How do they get to Lambda to do a serverless, or do you maybe see them first going from like containers to containers? Like if someone wants to eventually get and have serverless as part of their application stack.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point to ponder, because there is, I think about this in three different dimensions. One is, how do you create value for your end customers, whether they need to book a car service or submit an order or post a photo or something like that. So I think first and foremost, how do you serve your customers? Then there's a lot of sort of misconception around and hype around certain technologies. So
I'm so glad you said that.
yeah,
yeah. I was just, you read my mind. Keep going.
So Kubernetes is fantastic. The Kubernetes Buzz machine is also fantastic, and I think that the Kubernetes, for example, is probably used a little bit more often than is ideal if you're trying to optimize for total cost of ownership and operational effort. It has a very short release cycle. You need to upgrade it at something like every 3 or 6 months. So you're looking at going through in major infrastructure changes often with Kubernetes. It's great if you need it, but it's in some ways it's like flying a 747 from I don't know, Boston to Cape Cod or something like that. It's a very short distance and very overkill, or using a dump truck to get a pencil across the parking lot.
And I want to put that into context because, okay, Andrew, you've worked with startups for years now. You've worked with startups. Currently, you work with them in Y Combinator, which a lot of people, if you're not familiar with it, it's considered one of the most prestigious accelerators for startups. But then you also have worked previously with startups who were already found product market fit. They were already on that growth trajectory. So you've seen startups at all stages. And when you're saying most startups don't necessarily need EKS, are you saying really most startups don't even need EKS, even the ones who are like, oh, but I don't know. I guess maybe if you know what I mean, like you've seen so many like startups.
Yeah, so I have some demos that I think will be really useful for the team. So I could talk about any of these topics for days. So without time box this quickly. I think there is a thought pattern that says lots of people are using Kubernetes, I should use Kubernetes, or if I use Kubernetes, I'm not going to have cloud lock-in or vendor lock-in, etc. So that makes sense. However, they're sort of, in my opinion, either over optimizing for a future state that may or may not materialize or not.
Yes.
If you just say, I have a container workload, I want to run it on a server, Elastic Container Service is fantastic because you can use Elastic Container Service with Fargate to provide the compute, and you don't have to worry about metric servers and pod autoscalers and all the nuts and bolts of Kubernetes. So I would say, I think it's like anything. You need to look at what are the specific requirements for your workload at a point in time, the near-term requirements that you might anticipate having, and then you can go ahead and make a technology selection. There certainly are cases where if you need to run on-prem and you need to run in the cloud, Kubernetes makes sense. It's a great standard for that use case because you have container orchestration that's portable and standardized. If you're just looking at deploying a relatively straightforward containerized application, in the cloud. Elastic Container Service is great. You can save the $73 per month that the Kubernetes control plane costs, and it just works. Lots of large workloads run on ECS. So it was probably longer than
yeah, that was great. Yeah, let's go back to maybe the process here that we were going through.
Yeah, so we had questions about so you have an application. You say, okay, I want to migrate it. I want zero downtime. I'm concerned about these risks. I expect these outcomes. Then you get to your migration strategy, and there are a bunch of different strategies. So you can just relocate your application. So let's say you had a Linode server, a Rackspace server, then you just get an EC2 virtual machine and nothing changes. You could rehost, for example, take something from an on-prem Kubernetes cluster and then move it to EKS, which is our Elastic Kubernetes Cluster, our managed service. You could re-platform, so you could take something like a self-managed database. Let's say you run your own Postgres database, and you could use something like RDS Postgres, and it takes advantage. Then by using a managed service, you offload the undifferentiated heavy lifting of backups and other such things. And there, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip a few of these, but the other that's relevant to our conversation is refactor. And this is a question of moving from, so maybe you decompose a monolith, or maybe you start to leverage some serverless services. And I would say that serverless is fantastic because serverless is so cost effective and elastic. However, there's a learning curve to serverless. It's a bit of a different development paradigm. So going back a little bit to the business context, if your team has the skills and the time, has the time to learn the skills or has the skills to use serverless. Serverless is fantastic.
Yep,
I would say on average, folks, I don't see a ton of wholesale serverless migrations. They might decompose their app, carve off part of it, and then part of it might be serverless, and it might coexist with something else for a while until it eventually shifts. But yeah, Jen, you said you agree. Have you run into that in your customers?
Yeah, no, I was agreeing with the point that you were making about serverless. It really just making you more productive. And there's definitely research that shows that teams that use serverless applications are way more productive. More productivity means you can spend more time building out features, less time on the infrastructure. And that's really at the end of the day is when we are advising startups is we want to help you be able to think through the design choices that make you the most productive so you can move more quickly in building out your startups and growing your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a nuance that gets lost a little bit too is the size of the team. So if you're two people in a garage, just build a monolith, over provision the compute, and talk to your customers until you find a product market fit. If you're 2,000 people with single threaded ownership and engineering squads that can move independently, and you have service orchestration and discovery, then yeah, serverless is fantastic. So there's not a one size fits all. I would say don't get, as a technologist, it's easy to get enamored with technology, but I would say don't get enamored to the technology to the point that it prevents you from creating value for your business, for your users. So shifting gears, once you understand you have an app, you're going to migrate it, then you create your migration plan. And here, your migration plan is going to include things like your inventory. So what are you migrating? Where are you migrating it to, your destination, and then your migration strategies. So depending on your file sizes and your workload sizes and characteristics, this might be different. You might have a database that you need to replicate between services. You might be able to just dump the files and restore them, and you're good to go. So you would roughly create your migration plan, and then it's critical to do a test migration too, to make sure everything functions as expected. So you would test, and then once you have validated your migration plan, then you would do your cutover. And this is a little bit abbreviated. We have some great migration resources. So if you Google just AWS migration, there are countless articles about this. So Ola here mentioned migration plan equals Terraform. So as part of your tech strategy, so Terraform is infrastructure as code. That's a way to codify your infrastructure. So the old way of doing this is you log into your Windows NT4 server and you create a new IIS virtual host, and then you forget about it. And then 6 months later, when something breaks, you have to go figure out what was going on. That's a bit of that was my experience in 1999. Nowadays, with Terraform, you can define all of that in infrastructure as code. So it's versioned in a Git repo the same way any of your code is. So then when you need to change your infrastructure, you can just go in there and change the infrastructure definitions in that Terraform, and then you apply that Terraform and it gets deployed. So Terraform, CDK, CloudFormation are all infrastructure as code strategy. They're ways to define your infrastructure in code, so that you have better change management and state management. So
I love that you called that out, and thank you for bringing up infrastructure as code. It's definitely something that I see some startups who will then migrate, and then they didn't have. I literally just had this conversation with a startup, actually migrated to AWS, didn't have infrastructure as code, and then they're already starting to think about scale. And so usually I'm like, whoa, let's do that first, because yes, maybe it's going to take you a bit more time now, but it's going to save you so much more time down the road.
Yep. Tony NT 4.0 days. Yeah, that was a big upgrade from. Yeah. So does AWS provide temporary period for an unpayable project? There is a free tier, so you can get access for up to a year for certain free tiers, and then we also have a program for folks who are just getting started on AWS called Activate.
Good call.
Provides a varying amount of funding if you happen to be associated with, say, Y Combinator Startup School or Stripe Atlas, maybe used to incorporate your business. So those all will provide various amounts of credits. So in terms of replication strategies, it's a bit beyond the scope of what we'll have time to get into at the moment, but or migration strategies. But when you migrate, you're gonna there are a bunch of different strategies you could use. There are tools like AWS Data Sync if you have a large quantity of data to migrate. There's Snowball, so we can send you a tractor trailer filled with drives with an armed security escort if you need if you have petabytes and petabytes of data to transfer. So whether you're transferring a you're transferring a megabyte or 100 petabytes, we can provide that need, or we can help you wherever you are. So I think for a lot of folks, they can get away with something simple like an rsync or SFTP, but that's essentially the process of how you would go about migrating. So because we're in startups, we actually encourage folks to leverage managed services because they allow you to move so quickly. So there's a question in the chat, why didn't you start with network architecture? Really, really valid question. And the reason I didn't is because the demo I'm focusing on is going to be using services that require essentially no network architecture. So Jillian, I'm thinking it makes sense to shift gears to our demo, and then we can wrap up in a little bit.
Let's do it.
All right. So I'm just switch my screen share.
All right. And let me see. And for anyone who maybe joined in late, so this is AWS On Air Startups, where every single Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 4 a.m. Australia, 6 p.m. UTC, we go over a different topic related to building your business on AWS, building a startup. If you have any topics that you want to see on AWS On Air Startup, you can hit me up on Twitter here at Miss Jill Ford, and I will read your tweets of what it is that you are looking for to help you be able to build your startup on AWS. And yes, Saranya, these recordings are going to be on YouTube, on the AWS Events YouTube channel, every single episode. So if you've missed other episodes from other Tuesdays, go to the AWS Events YouTube channel, and every single episode is going to be there. Oh, Ola wants us to talk about backups. Ola's, I mean, infrastructure as code, backups. Ola, I mean, good call outs.
We have an opening on the team. We need more people like you. That's great. All right. So they keep us to a tight schedule here. So what I'm going to shift gears and show you now is two different things. So one is a Python API. So here, just imagine that on your local computer, you had created a Python API. So actually, in fact, that is the case here. So is this big enough?
If you can increase the font size,
okay,
that'd be great.
My pleasure. Okay. So here's a quick Python API that I created. This is very unremarkable. This API simply says hello world.
It works.
Yep, it works. The fast API says hello world. So imagine you're a relatively early developer, and maybe you go in and you have you want to build an app for your coworker. So you can let's see. So you can go in and just create your app. So I can customize for Jillian. So I'll go ahead and deploy this app or push this app. So I've already created this Git repo. So now this is going to come into my GitHub repo. You can see I just customized that for Jillian. So this is an API that says hello, Jillian. So I'll show you where I deployed that. So I'm using a service called App Runner. And what I love about App Runner for especially for smaller companies, for startups, is it just works. It's very simple because you can just point out your source code repo, it will build your app and deploy it to a website for you. So with App Runner, you can just go into your console. If it's not showing on your console, you can there's a handy search here, so you can search for App Runner. Then I've already done this, so it'll take a few minutes, but I'll show you the process. You can go in, you can say, I'm just going to deploy from source code. I've already connected to GitHub. So then I'm going to deploy my fast API demo. Let's deploy this automatically every time there's a change. This happens to be a Python app. So I'm going to need to do pip install. Let's see, what is that? Pip install requirements. Yeah. And then let's see, my app is called main app. My app happens to run on 48,000. So you click next, and then you can say fast API demo live. So here you can configure. App Runner is going to set up a container. So that's an isolated, secure computer environment, and each instance is going to have one virtual CPU and 2 gigs of memory. And then what's nice about this is the networking is all automatically configured. So I'm going to click next, review and create and deploy. And now, just like that, I've deployed a Python API on AWS. This is in the process of provisioning right now. It'll take maybe about 10 minutes for this first provision. But it's just really, really a nice way to get started, especially if you're using anything that can easily be containerized, Node, Python, if you have an existing containerized app. So that's my API. I have already deployed this, so you don't have to wait for that to start running. And here is my beautiful backend for my application that it gives me this JSON.
It works.
World. It works. Yeah. Always an exciting thing. So Yeah, so that is a great service. So App Runner will additionally auto scale as there is additional load on this. So if you, let's say, you had an Instagram post and you did some influencer marketing, it just blew up, and in the old days it would just crash your Bluehost or your Linode server, but now with App Runner it will create additional instances to make sure all of your users can buy, whatever that beautiful widget was that was promoted on Instagram by those influencers. So app runners, great for deploying websites for backends. So
Well,
then,
we got a question from Salvador that I think kind of relates to a general theme of, he says, what about for larger companies? Or maybe another way to think about it is really, when would you recommend App Runner to a startup?
so I recommend App Runner if you don't need, if you're not subject to HIPAA or SOC 2 compliance, PCI compliance. It has less it has less certifications for certain compliant workloads. So for larger companies, I would probably, it depends. You might use a combination of services. You might use App Runner for a mobile app, for example. Maybe it's a customer-facing mobile app, and you have a simple backend for it, and then maybe you have some more complicated applications with stateful workloads, and then you need to use Elastic Container Service or Elastic Kubernetes service so that you can maintain state or have more fine-grained control or meet the controls that are required to pursue SOC 2 compliance, for example.
Good call outs. Yeah. And I guess I would also add,
Yep.
I've noticed, I think the startups that are advanced enough in AWS where they have opinions on how they want to best utilize AWS for their application, they choose to not use App Runner and use, it could be ECS, EKS, maybe just straight serverless with SAM as an example, or maybe EC2. There's all different those types of use cases, but they don't use App Runner because they want to actually be very specific about the networking, which I know there was someone else who was talking about the networking infrastructure as well. So that's one distinction that I see between those who use App Runner and those who don't.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was another question from Martin asking for a demo of ECS. So we have a tool called Copilot, which makes it really, really easy to deploy an ECS cluster. It sets up a CI/CD pipeline for deploying your app and abstracts away a lot of the complexity of configuring the network. So I don't have time to do the demo today on our show, but I'd recommend checking into Copilot, which is going to give you a simple, you can create an ECS cluster that deploys a load balanced app with a couple simple command line.
Yeah. And I'll call out for containers because someone was asking, they wanted to see a containers demo. So there is another show by the containers advocate team, and they are experts in containers. And they have a show that's on Twitch called Containers on the Couch, Containers from the Couch. I don't know the exact cadence of that show, but I would just do a search afterwards and find it. That's a great resource. They know a ton about that specific topic.
Yep. Awesome. So do we have time for one more quick demo?
We're going to need to wrap up.
Okay.
We can, let's see, there was a question about Amplify. So what is Amplify? And this also kind of relates to when you're thinking about when do you recommend Amplify to startups?
Yeah, so actually that relates to my demo.
Okay. If you can do it super quick, because
Yeah.
we're gonna need to wrap up.
Yeah.
But there were so many questions. I love all the questions that have been coming in. It sounds like this is a really big topic, and we might need to do a part 2 for this one to be able to really capture everything.
Absolutely. So Amplify is our suite of tools that just makes it really easy to build and create specifically web apps and mobile apps. So Amplify includes a bunch of plug and play frameworks to help with that, as well as hosting, command line tools, and Amplify Studio. So, so simply thinking, let's say you need to build a web app, you need chat, and in order to do chat, you need a data store, you need a data cache, you need sockets, you need subscriptions, you need event notifications. Amplify provides frameworks for all of that. It also provides hosting. So similar to a Vercel or a Netlify, for example, where you might host a single page app like a Next app or React app, Amplify has hosting, which works extremely well. So this is a Create React app that I created. And in Amplify hosting, you can just go in here to Amplify. You can go create, host an app, go to GitHub, pull in point it at your React repo or your Next repo. So this is my React demo. I'm going to deploy my main branch. And then it automatically will build this and deploy it for you, which is fantastic. So I already did this a couple hours ago. So you can see this is actually deployed in my app, and now it's ready for all my friends and family to test it and say how wonderful it is, and give me lots of angel investment money for this beautiful spinning orb that I got for free. So yeah, Amplify hosting is great, and what's really awesome is you can do things like easily add a domain name to it. So you can say like mybeautifullapp.foobar.com. You can create preview branches. So if you want Jillian to see her customized version of the app, yeah, she can see it. You can add a password here. So if you want to keep it under wraps and super top secret. So I find that this is just this incredibly powerful way to deploy Vue apps, React apps, Next apps, all these single page apps that folks are using more and more these days.
Love that spinning orb startup, Andrew.
1% for $1 million.
What I also love about Amplify is it specifically for people who are new to AWS. And so it can feel overwhelming to feel like, oh my God, what's the name of the service that does this? I just want to be able to do this. And that's exactly really what Amplify is designed for. It's like, you don't need to worry about what's the name of the service that does this or how the best practices for cloud computing architectures in AWS work. And those best practices are really taken care of for you. So there's so much of that that's abstracted. But I guess similar to the other question earlier about we were going to the topic of what we were just talking about. Oh my God, sorry. I was thinking containers from the couch because I was reading someone's comment, but what we were just talking about earlier, the service. Oh my God, App Runner. Sorry,
Oh,
App Runner. So we're so similar to App Runner in that because with that abstraction, for those who maybe are more experienced with AWS, I find that they choose not to use Amplify because they want to be more prescriptive about how it is that they are using AWS. Whereas Amplify, it's more for someone who prefers that abstraction and being able to move quickly because they don't want to spend as much time learning and dealing with the infrastructure. Wow, we are coming close to time. Kirk saying there's no compression algorithm for experience. Awesome. Thanks, Kirk. Yeah, so we are about to wrap up right now. I love all of the questions. Thank you so much, everyone. I love your favorite TV shows. I love where all of you are coming in from. This is so exciting. Thank you for being here today. Andrew, any last bit of advice for startups that are migrating to AWS and are about to start that journey?
Well, I have two points. One is I think we need a 24-hour migration marathon, and we can just all start migrating and have a massive Twitch and put all our collective questions in because the audience engagement is just so
I love exciting.
It. So thanks for your engagement. In terms of tips, I would say just begin with the end in mind, right? It's you've heard it 100 times. It's a cliche, but it's very easy to get sort of myopically focused on. I must make my app serverless. I must use Dynamo. I must do this.
So good.
But do do what works so that you can get back to talking to your customers and building your business. No VC ever funded a plan that said, well, we never talked to any customers, but you should see our EKS cluster. It's beautiful. Like the Terraform is just a work of art. So, technology serves a purpose. It serves an end goal. So keep that front and center and use it as your North Star, and use it as a litmus test for everything that you invest your time and your limited time and resources in.
That is gold. Andrew, thank you so much. For those who maybe came earlier and who came in later, this is going to be on YouTube. Go onto AWS Events YouTube channel, and you'll be able to watch the recording of this as well as all the other AWS On Air Startup recordings that we have done. And this AWS On Air Startup, we are live every single Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. UTC. So join us every single Tuesday. And thank you so much. Oh, I know there were some questions. We try to get through as many of them as possible. If you had a question that you didn't get answered, I suggest posting that on AWS Repost. It's an active community of other people who are also using AWS to build their business, to be able to support a business that they work in as well. So next week, we are going to be back on Tuesday for AWS On Air Startup. And I'll tell you what the topic is quickly. We're going to be talking about building mobile apps. So a lot more with Amplify on MVPs for scale for mobile apps. That'll be on Tuesday, March 7th. And then March 14th, we're going to be talking about tips before you launch. What are some things that you should be able to do? You should do on AWS before you actually launch your app to the world. And someone else, I think, posted that they want that to join that 24-hour migration marathon. So I think that we're starting a movement, Andrew.
My wife always warned me to think before I talk. Maybe
Oh my God, I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And I hope to see you next Tuesday.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.